Hi, my name is Dominic, and I am doing a project on AWS Lambda for my class called Cloud Computing at the Harvard Extension School. This is my final project in a video kind of explaining how my application works. To start off, AWS Lambda is a new compute service that Amazon provides. It's still in preview, so you kind of have to get an invite to check it out. It's essentially a service that provides you kind of like a Node.js instance. And what happens is you put your code on one of these, what they call Lambda functions, and events trigger that code to run. And it's really nice because there's a kind of like a push and pull model where you can set it up so that Lambda can reach into a stream and pull stuff off, triggering that code, or you can have your application or other AWS events triggering your Lambda functions. The great thing about this is because it's just Node.js and AWS has this kind of like container that's keeping it all away from you, kind of abstracting you away from it. There's no instances or scaling or anything you have to worry about. You just kind of put your code up in the cloud and events trigger it and it runs. So there's two kind of ways that Lambda can work in what they call their models. There's a push model where an external system is triggering Lambda to take action and do something. It's providing a request and that kicks it into gear. So what's invoking it is an external system. And then Lambda is executing whatever that code is. So an example of this would be like if you have an S3 bucket and you're adding something to that bucket, that can create an event that would push Lambda to do something. So S3 in that case would be the what's invoking Lambda. You can also have, in this model, you can also have user-created events. So you can have your own applications trigger Lambda to take action. In the other model, which is called the pull model, Lambda watches a data stream, and then when it sees something new, it will take that item and use it as an event, and then trigger its Lambda function. So in this case, what's invoking it and executing it is Lambda, so it's playing both roles. I think the biggest difference between these two is that the push model is unordered, and the pull model will always take them in order. The only two events that are available in the pull model are DynamoDB and Kinesis. So as I said, you can take advantage of AWS's standard set of events, which are just S3, DynamoDB, and Kinesis. And then for each one of these, you could configure it in the Lambda console, or you could go into, for example, the S3 bucket, and in the properties section, there'd be something called events. So you can do it from either place. You can also trigger your Lambda functions from your application using the AWS SDK, something like PHP or Python to invoke something. You can also do it from the command line. So in this video, what I'm going to kind of talk about is my very basic Lambda application. And essentially what it does is a user uploads, or actually any way that a image could get into a S3 bucket. It could, a user could upload it. I might have another application dropping images there. Doesn't matter with this method. My Lambda function will get an event from that image being dropped into the bucket, and then it's going to create a thumbnail using image magic. And then the thumbnail gets dropped into another bucket, and that thumbnail being added to that bucket will trigger another event to another Lambda function, which is the notify admin function that will send an email to the administrator. And the goal is to have that email contain the thumbnail to the image, and then also a link to the larger original image as well. Okay, so now we're going to jump right into building the application. I'm going to start with making the first function in the application, which is going to be called create thumbnail. Before I start, there's actually two ways that you can upload a function into Lambda. You can do it by just putting in, your standard code in here if there's no dependencies at all. If you do have dependencies, like Node npm, I think it's like Node Package Manager. If you have any dependencies from there, other libraries of code that you want to include that wouldn't just be on this one document, you can also upload a zip. But there's a kind of a specific way you have to do that. So the first way we're going to build our function is going to be as a zip. So I'm going to pull up my directory here, and this is where I'm going to keep all my code for now. I've already installed Node on my machine, and I think that's all you need. You just have to make sure that npm is in your path, which I think I had to tweak with my path settings a little bit because my installation didn't go 100% right. But it's working now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder called create thumbnail2. And then I'm going to pull up a command prompt to get into this directory. So here we go. And I'm just going to change the directory to this directory. And now that I'm in this directory, I can run Node Package Manager commands. So I'm going to start by selecting a few dependencies that I'll need. So one is async. Oops, I didn't put the install tag there, so let's try it again. So async. And what you can see that it's doing is it creates a subdirectory here called node modules. And this is just kind of how npm works. It will make this for you, and then it downloads the most recent version of async and all of the files related to it. And so as that gets updated by other people who are managing those packages, we can get those updates here. So it's very nice. So I'm going to install a couple more. I'm going to install the AWS SDK. This is actually on Lambda already, but if you want to play around with the code on your local machine, you'll have to install it as well. I'm going to install one more, which is called GM. So now that I have these dependencies in my node modules directory, because I've installed them, we can now use this code that Amazon has so kindly given us. This is pretty much it's a function that creates a thumbnail. So I'm just going to kind of ape this and change it a little bit. Here I'm going to create a new file. So this is it's within my folder here, but it's above this directory. So I'm going to create a new file called create thumbnail2.js. And so this will be the JavaScript file of my actual Lambda function. We can then paste our code. So this is essentially what Amazon made in their documentation. It uses ImageMagick to resize a thumbnail. I did change a couple things because I wanted my thumbnails to be public. So I added, when I actually write the thumbnail to the next bucket, I added an ACL line that sets it to public-read. So essentially, I can kind of walk through this real quick. What it's doing is you can see all of our dependencies up here, and these are things that we've told Node that we require these to run this this code below. So that's why we had to install all of those. It's defining the size of the thumbnail, and then what it does is the exports.handler function takes in the event, which is this variable right here, which is going to be the S3 put event from dropping the image in the S3 bucket. So that event is kind of like a JSON like construct that that Amazon came up with, and I'll kind of make one of those in a little bit to test this. But it takes that event and it accesses all the variables from that, which include the the size of the image, its MIME type, and the name of it, the key, and the bucket it's coming from. All of that stuff is in there. And And then what it does is it invokes ImageMagick to resize, transforming the image somehow, and then it uploads it into another destination bucket. And that destination bucket is the bucket of the same name that it comes from. So the whatever bucket is triggering this Lambda function, it takes that bucket, and then on this line, it adds the word resized to the bucket name. And then what it does is the key, the file that it writes, which is the thumbnail, it adds a prefix to it that says resized hyphen and then whatever the file name was. So just kind of what you'd expect. So it takes in the, it gets an event, takes in the image, downloads the image, resizes it, and then it renames it and saves it to a different bucket, which will allow us to trigger another Lambda function later. Okay, so let's save this and close it out. And now, at this point, we can zip this. And what we would zip would be this file, which is our JavaScript file, as well as the node modules folder, so whatever dependencies it has. If you, for instance, zipped this folder, which is the top level one, it actually wouldn't work. So you have to zip these files so that this is on the top. So we're going to add it to an archive of the same name. I'm just going to make that so we can kind of inspect it real quick. This is my zip, and you can see I just have the JavaScript file and then the subfolder here. And now we can upload this into AWS Lambda as a function. There's a couple ways to do that. One would just be to upload it here. There was at the time when I was doing this last time, there was a bug with the uploader here. It wasn't thinking that my zip file is actually a zip. Instead, we can do this with the AWS command line interface. So we can give that a shot here. Before we do that, we need a role for this function. So because this function is going to execute something, what it's doing is it's going to write to S3. It's going to take this thumbnail and write to S3. It needs permission to do so. And you do this by giving it an IAM profile. So I've jumped over to my roles section, and you can get here by choosing, clicking on your name and going to security credentials, and then going into roles. And once you're into roles, this is where you can create an execution role or an invocation role. Now, you can also do this from the console. So I'm back in the console now. You can create or select a role when you upload. But I find it a little bit less confusing to do it here because you can kind of see what's already available. So the role that I'm going to be using for this function, I've just called execution role. So if we click on this, we can inspect it a little bit. So here is my role policy, and if I click show here, you'll see that it's just kind of like a JSON block. And essentially what we're doing is we're saying that this Lambda function is allowed to do two things: access logs and then also access S3. And this is like a really loose policy. It's saying that like this Lambda function can write to any log on my account or in any S3 bucket on my account. So ideally, you'd want this to be a little more specific to like certain buckets or whatever the function should do. But for me, this is going to work just fine. I'm going to click out of this, and here we will see my my ARN of this role. And now we can upload our Lambda function. So I'm going to do this through AWS command line interface. I already have my string typed out here, so I don't have to waste time. So I'm going to paste this. So you can see that it's just AWS Lambda upload function. It has the region, the function name. I've specified the name of the zip file. So if I wasn't in this directory, my path, I'd have to specify exactly the absolute directory. The role ARN is here. So this is important. I specified the handler, and this is what function gets run whenever the Lambda function activates. So what I mean by that is if we look at our file here, there was this function here that's called exports.handler, and that's the function that we want Node.js to run when we start. The way you specify that is you specify the handler when you create the function, and I've just noticed that I've done this wrong because I've said it was create thumbnail.handler when it should be create thumbnail2.handler. So I'm going to change that because what comes before the period is the file name, if in case you had several files in here. So I'm going to run this again, and what we get back. Oh, by the way, I specified the timeout and the memory size. So you can say how many seconds that you want this script to work, and the reason is because of the way the billing works. So if you don't want to get your script to get stuck in like a loop or something, you can have it time out after a certain amount of seconds. Okay, so what we've got back is some JSON just kind of telling us, that everything was created okay and that our function is there. So if we go back to the Lambda console and pull up our function list, you should see that we have a create thumbnail2 here now. So what we want to do is test this function somehow. So right down here, there's a button that says edit/test. So we're going to click into that. And here you can put in an event and like bump it up against your function to see what it does. So they give you some sample events here, and they're all kind of just these JSON structures that Amazon has come up with. So the closest one is going to be this S3 put, but the way our function works is it's actually taking a file from a bucket. So this this information that they have in here is not going to cut it for this function to work. So what we have to do is kind of come up with a sample event that we can test with easily. So what I've come up with is what I took is I took this S3 put sample code and I kind of changed it to actually apply to a real file that I have in my bucket. So the bucket that we are going to reach out to, or this is going to trigger from, is called dpeluso-resize-input. So we can expect that if this works, our thumbnail is going to go into dpeluso resize input resized will be the name of the bucket. The key of the file is called happyface.jpg because that's just what the demo had. So what I've done is I've uploaded an image to dpeluso resize input that is called happyface.jpg. So now this event will correspond with a file that's actually there. So we can test it out right now. One thing that I did is I replaced my IDs, my secret access keys, so that they wouldn't appear on the video. So I'm going to do that out of frame just a little bit. And I can paste my S3 put request there. So now I'm going to just click this button, which will invoke. And what that does is it takes this sample event that's on the left here, which you can't really see, and it invokes the function that I uploaded earlier. And down here, we can see the output. So a lot of these logs that are here, they correspond with, let me move this back. They correspond with console.log outputs in JavaScript within Node. If you give the execution profile the ability to write to CloudWatch via logs, then they will also be logged in CloudWatch, and you can get at them. You can always access these logs and see what your functions are doing. But they also output here all the time as well under execution results when you test it this way. So if you look at this, I realize that I have to censor this out a little bit, but on the bottom we have this line here that says it's a log output that says that we successfully resized this file and put it into our resize bucket. So what I can do now is if we go back to S3, we can go back into our input resized bucket. In here, among all the other stuff that I've tested, we have a resized-happyface.jpg. So the resize appears to have worked. We could download it to double check though. There we go. There's our image resized. We can go back here to our function list, and we can see some of the CloudWatch stuff that it's doing. You can see that a request came through, and if we click on this logs link, it should show us the stream, which gives us the details of these requests, and you can kind of make them bigger and that kind of thing. One thing I did notice is that sometimes it just takes a very long time to get these CloudWatch logs to show up. So I think I waited like more than like 15 or 20 minutes sometimes. So it can be kind of frustrating when you're debugging with like live stuff. But I mean, that's why the edit/test thing is here. So right now there's nothing triggering this Lambda function, which we want to do. I mean, we don't want to just have to provide it the event every single time. So there's two ways we could trigger this event, and well, two ways that I know of for this example. One is that we could tie it to an S3 bucket so that S3 events trigger this function, which is what we ultimately want to do. But we can also invoke it using, let's say, maybe our own custom application or from the Amazon command line interface. So we can do that really quickly. I'm going to pull up my command line here, and in this directory we have this input.txt file, and that is it's just the S3 put event that I used in the last example. I just saved it in a text file. So we will be able to use AWS CLI to use the function invoke async, and what that will let you do is specify a function name and then add arguments, which in this case is going to be input.txt, and then we can hopefully trigger that function from the command line. And you can see that it returned a status of 202. So now if we go back here and we refresh, we'll see kind of another set of lines here, and we can go into our logs again and we'll see more transactions. So second set of output logs are here, starting from this line going down. So we were able to invoke it from the command line, which is great. But really what we want to do is we want to have an S3 bucket tied to this function so that when you add in a new file, the function activates. So this is done with when you're in the Lambda console, this is done with the configure event source button. There's another place you can do this, but it makes sense to do it here. So you can choose which bucket you'd like to tie it to, and then you have to give it an invocation role so that you can say, you have to give permission to that bucket to access your Lambda function. Just like you had to give permission to your Lambda function to execute some other service. You can also do this from S3 itself. So if we make a new bucket, give a bunch of random things. So we have our bucket here, which is brand new, and we go to Properties. Within the S3 console, we can go to the Events tab, and then you can specify send to Lambda function, and you can put in the ARN and the invocation role ARN for the S3 bucket to send events to Lambda. So in our example, what we want to do is give an invocation role for the input bucket to trigger the create thumbnail Lambda function. So we have to give it a role policy to access Lambda. So here is the policy that I'm using. Again, it's very generic. It just says that whatever has this role policy is allowed to affect Lambda invoke function. All right, so now I've tied this bucket, which is dpluso resize input, to my create thumbnail Lambda function, and I want to give it a try. So I'm going to upload a photo here. We can select this picture of Steve Ballmer. So our image is uploaded, and hopefully within seconds, Lambda has been activated, and a resized version of that image would be put here. And here we go. We can see the most recent image is this one, and here's our thumbnail image. So everything's working with this Lambda function, and now, because we're successfully getting the file dropped into this bucket, which is dpluso resized, input resized, there's an S3 put event that we can take advantage of here, and this is the S3 put event that I want to send out my email to notify the administrator that there's a new image to be downloaded. Okay, so now we're going to do our second Lambda function. Should be a lot quicker than the last one. So I'm going to go back into Lambda, and this next function is going to be just an inline function. There's no dependencies here because we are using the AWS SDK on Node, but that's already available on these instances. There's like 2 or 3 libraries that have just come on every single Lambda function by default, and so you don't have to include AWS SDK. That's one of them. So I'm going to call this notify admin2, and since we're using inline code, we can just edit this in here. So let's delete the sample code, or we can just say none and get rid of it. And I've already written this Lambda function, which essentially what it does is it creates an SES object, so a simple email service, and it takes a bunch of stuff in from the event here, and it does a little bit of regex to come up with what the old bucket was and all that stuff, but I figured all that out. And then it creates an email, an HTML message, and then down here it sends out the email. So pretty simple. It sends out an HTML email using Amazon Web Services. That's about all it's doing. So I'm not a Node developer. I wish I was better at JavaScript, but this is the best my spaghetti code can come up with. So what we're going to do is just copy this into the box here. And I've also named this the handler, so we don't have to change any of that. We do have to select our execution role. So I already have a role, an execution role for SES, and here's the policy that I have for it. It again just says that this Lambda function is allowed to access anything on simple email service. I'm going to select that right here. Okay, so now we have our execution role set up. I'm going to select 1024 for the amount of memory, give the timeout 10 seconds, and then we can just create our Lambda function. So it's very easy when there's no dependencies or anything. You just copy and paste and create your function, and it's up and running. So again, we can test this out. I'm going to go into my test utility thing. I do have an input event JSON that I can run. I'm not going to bother moving it because I'm just going to edit out the secret key later. So here is my put request, and so you can see it's going into dpluso resize input resize, which is our second bucket. And I have a key in here, but I'm going to change that to say happyface.jpg because I know that image is in there. So I'm going to try to invoke our code here, and we're going to see what we get on the output. So you can see that I was a little more deliberate in how I was outputting my console logs. So it says trying SES. It outputs some of the URLs that I'm coming up with because I was testing the regex stuff. And then it sends a message, and this is the message ID. So hopefully I should have an email in my inbox. But one thing I want to mention before I go any further is that to get SES working, because it was in sandbox mode, if anyone's looking to try this, you have to get like verified in order to send to other people. But because we can leave it in sandbox mode for our purposes, because I'm just going to add, I just added a verified address, which was my my Gmail address, and that means I can only really send to me. I can't send to anybody else using SES until I request production access. So I did go through that step, and because we had our IAM profiles correct, our execution role correct, we should have an email in our inbox. All right, and here is my inbox for that account, and you can see there's a new upload, new email right on top that says new image upload. That should be the one that triggered here. So if we display images, we can see that our thumbnail is here. So that is the happyface.jpg that's been resized, and that was also in our input JSON, which was our S3 put request, the one that we were testing with. So that triggered this email to go out. So all that's left is we have to tie this Lambda function to the S3 bucket, just like we did last time, and give it an invocation role, give the S3 bucket an invocation role. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done that. I've tied both of these buckets to have their own invocation roles that go to separate Lambda functions, and now everything should be buttoned up. So we're going to test it out. Okay, let's upload another image. I'm going to pick another one of Hank Hill here and start our upload. And what should be happening is this upload is going to get finished. It's going to trigger create thumbnail, which is then going to drop the thumbnail into the resized bucket, which will then trigger the notify admin, which should send me an email. So let's go over back to my inbox here, and it looks like I do have a new email. Let's click on it, and there's our resized thumbnail. And if we click on this, we should get the larger image. So that's the application working as it should. Simple as it is, but it's using 2 Lambda functions and other Amazon Web Services, and absolutely no instances and managing of servers and applications and what. Okay, so again, there's the application that we made. It's really very simple. Could have been made very easily, using something like the AWS SDK with, probably just one file of like a Python script that would drop something to a bucket and then resize it. But that's not really what Lambda is about. It might not respond as fast as Lambda to events too, but the real point is that we have our custom code running in the cloud, and there's like no overhead. There's nothing to update or maintain, no web service to run and manage. All of these things they're like very high availability as well. I don't think there's like an SLA for Lambda yet, but on some part of their marketing documents they said like 99.99% uptime. But the point is, you get this really high availability of this application that's extremely robust and scalable. They do all the capacity provisioning as well, but you don't have to pay for it unless it's used. So unlike something like EC2, where you're just paying per hour that this thing's running and available, you can have all of your Lambda functions, very robust Lambda functions available and just sitting there. And if nobody's using them, you don't pay for them. And it's only once you start using them that you get charged. And it's something cheap. It's like, I think it was like 20 cents for every million requests. And the free tier is like the first million is free. So there are a couple drawbacks, limitations that I noticed. The first is that it is kind of like, it is tricky to do all this, especially because of the permissions and They laid everything out in a way that makes sense. The invocation roles and the execution roles, but the IAM profiles can be kind of tedious to debug sometimes. Um, the only available runtime right now is Node.js, but one of the parameters when you add a function is you specify the runtime. I actually have it right here. Part of it is specifying what the runtime is, and the only available option right now is Node.js, but perhaps they'll add other languages and runtimes later. So in order to use this, you really do have to know how to use JavaScript and Node. There are really lacking AWS events. I couldn't believe that SQS is not, there's no events for that. It seems like the absolute perfect use case. So I mean, hopefully, and this is still in preview, so hopefully they come up with some more of these AWS standard events that we could take advantage of. Because triggering these things from your own application. When I was thinking about this, it's why not just have your own application do that code if it's going to be light enough for Lambda to handle anyways? It's one of those questions. It doesn't seem extremely practical until they can get some more services on board. And debugging can be pretty tough, especially because you kind of rely on CloudWatch to have all of those logs. And there were just some times where it was taking so long, and I would try to load a log, and it would have like an error saying that the stream couldn't be loaded. So it can be kind of tricky to debug. So lastly, I'm pretty excited about Lambda. I think it's really cool because of the direction it's going with the cloud. JavaScript's been around for a very long time, and it's mostly been used, in the popular ways for like front-end web development recently. But very recently, Node has made it possible to use JavaScript on as a runtime environment. So now you can, just a couple lines of Node.js, you can, just JavaScript, you can run a web server with nothing else. And so like Lambda, it seems like the next kind of logical step, because now you can deploy kind of really advanced applications that scale infinitely and have high availability, and you don't need anyone to maintain any of those servers or do updates or manage web servers. So I think it's interesting, kind of like how JavaScript is. Maybe it's not coming back. Maybe it didn't go anywhere, but it seems more important every day. And this seems kind of like another step in that direction. So I appreciate you watching that whole thing if you made it through that, and thank you very much.